and welcome to the second edition of Nowhere Video's Visions from Beyond. My name is Todd Hilton, and joining me as co-host for this show is the president and founder of Northwest Paranormal Investigations, Mr. Robert Chamberlain. In this program, we will take you out on ghost hunting investigations. We'll show you the tricks of the trade, and we'll also show you some fantastic video and photographs that we have taken throughout the many travels that we have done for this production. And tonight we'll be featuring, our main feature in the show tonight will be a tour of the Portland Shanghai Tunnels. This is a tour that was given to us by Mr. Michael P. Jones of Cascade Geographic Society, and he was so nice to take us on our own personal tour, actually with a small group of people there. And we also have an interview with him. Mr. Kevin Thornton and myself did a small interview right before our tour. And actually, Bob, if you would tell the folks about what the Shanghai Tunnels are, how they got started, and how we got involved in them.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank the Fowler and the Archbalds for letting us borrow their space here. Seeing how they don't have any problems with us being here, but let's get back to the show. The Shanghai Tunnels was first started back in the late 1800s all the way up through 1941. At the beginning, they used the Shanghai men for sailing vessels, and they were sold to captains of different ships, anywhere from $50 to $55 a person. They also Shanghaied women for slavery, and they were used primarily for prostitution. When a prostitute would have a child, then that child would end up being sold off so that the ladies wouldn't worry about their children, but yet they're still lost. Michael Jones is very knowledgeable. He's a professor. He teaches college teachers and high school teachers and grade school teachers, and he also does field trips in his tunnels for the kids of schools, and everybody seems to like it down there. But Michael is very knowledgeable about what he tells you. His stories are fantastic. He's one of the nicest person you could meet. By looking at him, you wouldn't think so, but he is a very, very nice person.
As we've mentioned, Michael is a very good storyteller. In fact, if you were to take the Shanghai Tunnel tour more than once, you would find that it would be different every time. In fact, there are actually 3 different tours that they currently do. One is a ghost hunters tour, they have a historical tour, and then they actually have a third one where they combine both the historic and ghost hunting tours into one. It's very fascinating to go to. I've only had the pleasure of going down there once. This was back in November of 2000. This was actually our very first outing that we did for Visions from Beyond, the first videotaping we ever did. So we didn't know what to expect. There was a lot of questions that we had, and it was just a very fascinating experience for us. Bob, myself, Kevin, and my wife Holly were all along on this first tour that we had of the tunnels, and it was pretty amazing. Some of the things that we learned, and actually had gotten some photographs out of there too. I personally have gotten we got an ectoplasm there, and we have a few pictures with orbs in them. There's actually a lot of activity that goes on down there. Now, Bob, you've been down there probably more times than you can count, and I know different things have happened. Like, didn't the lady, somebody grabbed her shoulder or back of her neck or something down there?
Well, kind of. The way it really happened down there, well, there was 2 incidents. One is there was a lady down there that was helping out on one of the tours, and somebody started playing with her hair, and they would raise up the end of her hair and then they would let it go. And they would do that throughout most of the tour. Another lady that used to work down there quite a bit, she was backed up against the wall down there. We were working on one area, and she knew nobody was behind her, but there was this hand that went down her neck, under her shirt, and down her back. She jumped, she screamed.
I can imagine.
She thought somebody was behind her, so she turned around and looked at the same time when she screamed. There was nobody there.
Of course, there was nobody there. She was up against a wall.
Yeah, so, I mean, she screamed so bad that they all ran out of there. But then they all went back down there 15 minutes later and started working again. And then you have the lady down there that worked in one area. She was working away, moving some dirt and stuff because they were digging out a stair ladder that led to the second level of the Shanghai Tunnels, which we can't get into. But they were digging away, and she stood up and she goes, "Oh my God, what's in my pants pocket?" So she dumped out her pants pocket. It was full of water or liquid.
Really?
She asked Michael what she thought that was, and Michael says, "Well, I guess some ghost just peed in your pocket." So they thought it was kind of funny at first, but that did happen down there.
Wow. So there are all kinds of things have happened down there. Now there's also a lady that is looking for her daughter down there.
Right. If you get over there where the baby buggy is,
right.
If you go over there by the baby buggy, sometimes you will see the apparition of a lady standing there. And she's looking for her little girl. And when you see her there, you turn around and look away and look back. She's gone. There's no way for anybody else to get into that tunnel.
Right.
When you go down there in a work group, you're all together. When you're down there, the doors get closed. So there's no way for anybody else to get in that tunnel without somebody knowing about it.
You've said before that the Shanghai Tunnels are perhaps the most haunted place you've ever been to, or?
Well, let's put it this way. It's the most active place I've been to.
Most active.
We really can't call it haunted, because haunted is actually just when things are happening down there.
I guess that's kind of a relative term. I mean, haunting is pretty vague.
Right. Haunting is actually when things are happening.
Right.
Things get moved, things get broke, stuff like that. Active means where you get a lot of photos of orbs, ectoplasm.
Where they're more just there, they don't cause any problems, or they don't move objects or anything. They're just there.
Well, they have moved objects down there.
Oh, have they?
They've actually turned some of the old loggers' boots. We had a couple of them we had faced upside down, so that people, when they go on the tour, they could see what the soles of the loggers' boots look like.
Right.
But we've gone in there and the shoe has been turned back up. Or we've gone in there and turned the lights all on, our little twinkly lights, our stagecoach lanterns we have in there. We've turned those on in there and get ready to go back in there with the tour, the lights would be off.
We have this footage for you. This is our tour of the Portland Shanghai Tunnels, and a tour led by Michael P. Jones. We also have an interview right beforehand. We kind of learn about the project of uncovering the tunnels and making them open to the public via tours. And it's a great piece of footage we got here. We hope you enjoy it. Check it out. We're speaking with Michael P. Jones. He is the curator for We're speaking with Michael P. Jones. He is the curator for the Portland Underground, and you can tell us the rest of your title there. It's quite extensive there.
Right. This is a project through Cascade Geographic Society, and it's a historical preservation project, but it's not your normal, ordinary, everyday historical preservation project. It's a project that is unveiling Portland's past, its shameful past. You know, we look at Portland, Oregon as a nice little Victorian city snuggled along the banks of the Willamette River, and nice and prim and proper, when reality was that it was not that way at all. That was a facade. Portland was really a place of vice, a place of human abuse, particularly when it came to Shanghai. And the Portland Underground Project involves unveiling the Shanghai Tunnels and all that it encompassed.
So Shanghai actually took place here in Portland? A lot of people never knew that.
Yes, correctly. In fact, I don't care where you go, it affected every single place in the Northwest, because people who wandered into Portland, they found themselves in the wrong place at the right time, and they would end up in the underground, locked up in cells, and eventually taken through the tunnels and put aboard ships, where they were forced to work for nothing. And it took them 6 years to get back to Portland.
If they ever got back at all?
If they returned. There was always the possibility of them dying for many different reasons while out to sea. And this is a piece of the past that's been hidden, and we have been working to uncover this and share this with the public, because after all, this is Portland.
The public has a right to know what happened in the past.
Exactly. This is Portland's 150th anniversary, and while they're celebrating its anniversary, they need to celebrate its truth, and this is part of that.
Well,
Okay.
as far as ghosts are concerned, because everybody knows our show is about ghost hunting, and as far as ghosts are concerned, what can we expect down in the tunnels?
You can expect the unexpected. We've had so much take place that I cannot explain why that occurred. People who are going on the tours experience different things. They see things, lights turn on and off, doors open and close. And I've just lately really come to accept that I don't know what's going to happen.
So I guess that's one thing we're going to find out when we go down in there and get our tour among the group that we've been invited with, along with Bob Chamberlain, who
Northwest Paranormal. Northwest Paranormal.
Yeah.
That's it right.
who has introduced us to Michael and invited us on this tour so we can check out the tunnels and see what happens down there.
What you're going to see tonight, some people do not want you to see. They don't want you to know this history. Portland is 150 years old this year, and it's celebrating its past. Well, this is part of its past, but it's the past that's been hidden. It's the past that they don't want revealed. Now, this is our Shanghai Tunnel Ghost Tour. We talk about the ghosts as we go. Since before Halloween, things have happened on our tours. People have experienced things. And you may experience things. And if you do, you may want to share them. But please try not to scream. All right, watch your head.
Door. Wow. Oh, wow. Scooch. Jen.
Oh, look at that buggy.
Oh, neat.
Shanghai began in 1850. All up and down the West Coast, they called it crimping, except here in Portland. Portland was the jumping off place to the Orient. This is where the ships were coming, and one of the main reasons is that Portland was a freshwater port. When they entered the Columbia River from the Pacific, there were barnacles on the bottom of the ships. By the time they reached Portland, those barnacles had fallen off, and it was like they had taken that ship and put it in the dry dock, and they hired a crew to slowly scrape the bottom clean. immediately had put money into the shipping company's pocket. But the problem was the Shanghai. When the captain arrived, there was a man who greeted him at the wharf. And he was a very polite man, very confident. And he would say something like this: "Greetings, I am the law of Portland. And I want to make sure that you have a great stay in our city. I'm going to make sure that no one is shanghaied from your ship. And that's going to cost you X amount of dollars." Well, the captains would say, "I'm not paying you a thing." And the Shanghaier, always polite, would say something like, "Well, good day. I know we'll be doing business later on." And then one by one, his crew would begin to vanish. The captain would go to the police, and the police would say, "Oh, that doesn't happen in our city." They'd go to City Hall, and they'd say, "No, this man is a pillar of our community. Would never do anything to harm you and your crew." The captains could do nothing. When he was ready to leave port, the Shanghai would get a hold of him and say, "I've got X amount of your men, and it's going to cost you $50 apiece to get them back." And the captain would reluctantly pay the $50 per man. And Shanghaiers loved to locate their operation in places like saloons that were very wild and a lot of fights. Because the loser was thrown outside into the street. And there was a crew that worked the alley between the two buildings. They would run out into the street and drag the loser into the alleyway, then into the building and down into the underground, where they locked them up in cells like this one here. This was the best place to be locked up in, because these, at least you had ventilation through the bars. Most of the cells were not made out of brick. They didn't have barred windows. They were made out of oak boards covered with tin, and they were like ovens. And people were crammed into these, and they sometimes died because of suffocation. Now, women were never shanghaied. Women worked for the Shanghaiers. And if you notice over here, the beautiful Victorian baby buggy, the rocking horse and the high chair, they came from the house of prostitution above us on the 3rd floor. This is when babies were born, what sometimes happened, they were raised on that 3rd floor. And the mother was always hoping that she would meet some rich person who would rescue her child and her from this way of life. But it generally didn't happen. White slavery was big in Portland. Women were thrown into white slavery, and that's where they died. But they were the bait. Now, after you collected your men, you would approach the sea captains and let them know that you had men for sale. And the captains always purchased. And they would send word to the Shanghaier, "Deliver the men just before I set sail." And when they got the word, the Shanghaiers would slip knockout drops into their food or their water. Remember, they're being held in cells like this one. They would then take them through the underground, unconscious, to the ships, where they collected their $50 per head. The men had to be knocked out for 13 to 16 hours, because that's how long it took for the ship to go down the Columbia and cross the bar into the Pacific. If they came to before they crossed the bar, the men would jump overboard and try to swim the shore. Most of the people never made it. Most of the people would jump overboard and never reach shore. They would die trying to get away from the Shanghaiers, because they knew what was going on. They knew that for the next 6 years, that's 2 voyages, that's how long it was going to take them to get back to Portland. For 6 years, they were literally dead. They had no control over their life. Their life was somebody else's. And if you can imagine this, take away 6 years of your life. Now we're going to move through this tunnel right behind us. And you need to, you need to do exactly as I do. Because if you don't do exactly as I do, you are going to be hunched over quite a bit. And I guarantee I know the easiest way to do this. Now, there are some modern pipes in the way that we have to deal with. But you can squeeze around them if you follow my directions. Now, the first directions, you don't want to go through this side. Because when you go through this side, you're going to hit your head on some pipes behind you. So you're going to go over here. And move slow. And remember what you're walking through. And you're going to hear the sound of broken glass beneath your feet. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, why you hear that broken glass, why it's here. And watch the right to your left, the mud puddle. We have a leaky pipe. Alrighty. When you walked through that first door, you were no longer under Old Town Pizza. And when you came through this tunnel and went through this archway, you left the building. Now, there are no two tunnels alike. They're all different. This section's kind of interesting, and if you look right over here, you'll notice there is a small tunnel that puts air into the tunnel system. This was very unusual, but they used it in this area here. Generally, there was no ventilation whatsoever going into it. Now, this tunnel here, if you've ever eaten at Coot Street Fish House, goes right across the street. This was blocked in 1941 by the city. And this Coot Street Fish House was a very luxurious place today. But back in its early day, it was notorious. And it was one of those Shanghai places that you did not want to go into. Now, when were the tunnels built? At the time the buildings were built. They were not built after the fact. The city, what they said about the tunnels is that they were used to deliver goods directly from the waterfront into the underground buildings. That kept them from going above ground and then down. They also said it was an ideal way to protect it against floods, because the floodwaters of the Willamette would go under the city instead of over it. And of course, there was a lot more floodwater than there were tunnels. The real reason, it was for Shanghaiing. There was plenty of victims. These victims were considered the dregs of society. The sailors, the loggers, the sheep herders, the cowboys, people that worked along the river, the people that worked as hard as they played. These were the victims, and no one cared about it. Now, if you look at the architecture, this is outstanding work. And the beautiful stonework was done by Italian stonemasons that came from Italy. They were assisted by the Chinese. The Chinese, however, I'd say are the greatest tunnel builders in the world. They were brought here by tongs to America, and to pay for their passage, they did some very, very difficult work. They built the railroads, the canals, they cleared land, they took out stumps, and they built the underground. The Chinese probably built 99% of it. Now, the beautiful architecture here was not considered anything special back in those days. It was ordinary, everyday work. And a good example is right here. Look at this post. This post, look at the craftsmanship. And just a simple post in the underground. And we don't even do work like this today. So when you take something that was put in, like, say, 3 years ago, like this post, using city code, look at that. Doesn't even compare. Now, if you were in the Old South End, and the Old South End was where the Morrison Street Bridge is today. On the west side of the river, There was a place called the Snug Harbor Saloon. In its later days, it was known as Doll and Penny Card Room, and some of you may have been there.
Montana Assay.
Montana Assay, right. Well, the Snug Harbor, before they called it Doll and Penny's, that was the original name. And it's gone, unfortunately. It was torn down in the mid-1980s, and there's a new bank building sitting there now. But if you go to that street corner, that's the southeast corner of the Morrison, on the west side of the Morrison Street Bridge. Stand there at night and wait and listen. Forget about the noise of the traffic. Listen. And they say you will hear cries, moans, people pleading for help. And they say those are the victims of this story that I'm going to relate to you. 2 men got off a ship, and they hadn't had a drink for 3 months. And they headed right for the Snug Harbor Saloon. They started to walk through the door, and one of the men saw a trap door open in the sidewalk. So he looked down at the base of the ladder. There was a barrel of whiskey, so he told his buddy, "Come on, let's go. We got free whiskey." They climbed down to the end of the ladder. Lo and behold, there wasn't 1 barrel, there were 10 barrels. They realized they couldn't drink 10 barrels of whiskey by themselves. So not to be greedy, every person walking by, they told them to come on down and have a drink. Pretty soon there's over 30 people in the underground getting drunk. A short time later, Joseph Bunkle Kelly, one of the more colorful Shanghaiers in Portland, walked by, looked down the trap door, and he saw all these passed out men. Not one to let a good opportunity pass him by. He scurried down that ladder and he counted 35 men. When he got to the last one, he realized something was terribly wrong here. No one was breathing. They were all dead. And they understood what happened. They were not in the underground of the Snug Harbor. They were in the underground of the mortuary next door. And they'd been drinking formaldehyde. Well, like I said, not one to let a good opportunity pass him by. He climbed up that ladder, shut that trap door, came back later that night with a crew, and they hauled every single man down to the waterfront, sold them not for the $50 a head, but $55 a head, getting the extra money from the captains, claiming it took them just a little bit more money to get them this dead drunk. How can you sell dead men? It happened all the time. These old bed springs date back to the Victorian era, and they came from the House of Negotiable Affections that was located above us. If these could talk, they would tell you stories about who was being shanghaied and who wasn't. And incidentally, most of the so-called hotels in this area were not hotels. They were brothels. And the story that they all came to a halt when the Lewis and Clark Fair opened in 1905 is not true. One of the largest houses of prostitution, known as the Paris House, opened down in this area. It claimed to have over 100 women working for him. And the Victorian era is when Portland boomed for Shanghai. San Francisco became a distant second. Third became Astoria. And this was a time when you didn't just do things. You had to do things properly, including, if you were a woman, faint. Right here is an old fainting sofa that we dug up from the underground. Now, back in those days, during this time period, women wore corsets to make their waists very tiny. And it choked off their breathing. And they would pass out. But unfortunately, because of that corset, they couldn't bend at the waist, so they kind of just collapsed. And that wasn't considered a lady, being a lady. So they actually put this, invented the fainting sofa, which was a narrow sofa with a built-in pillow on one side. So when they fell back, they wouldn't hurt their head. When these hit the market, and incidentally, they had wheels on the legs. And so what they would do is the women would hire people to push these around the house, following them. And if they had a strange look on their face, they wheel it up behind them real quick so they could fall backwards and not be hurt. When these hit the market, women were told, if you cannot pass out properly, you will not be considered a lady. Now, the Victorian era is when Shanghai became an art form here in Portland. They perfected it. They invented things. But the biggest problem was people dying. Those knockout drops were so powerful. Remember, they had to be knocked out for 13 to 16 hours. So a man named Doc Baker, who ran the Baker Drug Company, decided if he couldn't stop Shanghai, which he hated, if he couldn't stop it, he was at least going to make sure people didn't die. And so he invented 3 different types of knockout drops. There was a small pill, a medium-sized pill, and a large pill. And these were, predominant ingredient was opium. And so the small pill was given to a small person, medium-sized pill to the medium-sized person, and a large pill to the large person. Something that even the stupidest Shanghaier could figure out. And it worked. The death rate went down to practically nothing. Now, right over here, just a week ago, right at this spot, right where you're standing, a lady was standing here. I was looking at these boards over there. Another man was standing here. Everyone else was over there. She was by herself, sensing no one behind her, no one around her. All of a sudden we saw her turn around and scream. She said that someone pushed her, the small of the back, pushed her, and she felt it. So when she turned around expecting to see someone, there was no one. No one. Where I'm standing is where 2 cells were. One here, one over here. They were here in up until 1974 when Old Town Pizza opened. Just before they opened, they had an inspection by the fire marshal, and he said, tear them down. And they said, why? They're brick. They said, tear them down, or you don't open. First of all, we're not under Old Town Pizza. Had nothing to do with them. But since this was connected to their underground, they had to tear them down. Every opportunity to block, to tear down, to erase, to hide, they did. It was a deliberate effort to erase the past. Now, I had a good old friend named Big Ears Kelly. That was his nickname. His real name was Melbourne Gibson. And he would track down people who had been shanghaied and people who knew about Shanghai, and I'd interview them. And he called me one day and he says, you need to get down under this one building. There is a pile of logger cork boots. Now, cork boots are spike boots that loggers used to walk on slippery logs in the woods. And I said, Kelly, when did you last see these? He says, I've never seen them. But I know they're there because a good friend of mine who did is about to be in Shanghai. Him and his buddies had to take off those boots and throw them down. He says, I think they're still there. So I said, okay, so I came here exactly to where he said to look. And I found the cork boots. Now, if you can imagine, people were wearing these. People who were being shanghaied. And that was really the first evidence I had that made this really human. This whole story about Shanghai and the tunnels, the underground, the vice, the corruption, this really made it human. And it changed my perspective. This was a story that needed to be told. This was a story that you couldn't hide. Because if you hit it, it was bound to happen again. And this is the place right here where more cries and more pleads for help and moaning has come from any other area. It's right here where these shoes are. Every time they investigate, there's no one here. Every time they look for someone who's hurt, all they find is the cork boots. Now, if you can imagine a time when nothing was blocked, and if you look right over here to this wall, we're now working on the other side of that. And we have found remnants of an opium den. Cool. Remnants of a speakeasy, and a speakeasy was when Prohibition hit, they went underground. A lot of the bars and stuff. Some of them were really nice, and others were not very nice at all. Also, an old gambling den. Now the problem was when you had your gambling den and your speakeasy located underground, as well as your opium den, some people wandered the wrong way, and they were never found again. They were grabbed by the Shanghaiers. It was a time when the only people that were underground were the Shanghaiers and their victims. Nobody else was down here. Nobody else was crazy enough to be down here. Up till 1941, this was all open. Nobody was worried about somebody breaking into their building to steal from them. But that all changed. In 1898, the Portland Chamber of Commerce finally convinced its members that they had to do a study on Shanghai. And they found that 1,500 people a year were being shanghaied out of Portland. Well, that's a very conservative estimate. It was actually more like 3,000. But let's just go with their 1,500 figure. How can 1,500 people disappear and no one see it or be in a position to stop it? Well, it was very simple. The key was the saloons. That's where most of them were disappearing from. The saloons back in those days were very unique. People would claim, okay, they would go in with their buddy. One would park themselves by the front door of the saloon and not budge. He would nurse one beer all night long. The other guy would go in and have a ball, and the stories was always the same. They vanished. The guy said, I never left my post at the front door. But he disappeared. That's because he was standing at the wrong place at the right time. That bartender would pull a lever. Later on, when electricity came from Willamette Falls to Portland, here's an example of that early day electricity, they would push an electric button. They would fall through the floor, land on a mattress. The objective was not to hurt them. The objective was remove them from the world above and getting them into the underground as fast as possible. Now you're saying, okay, when they hit the mattress, this door would spring back shut. It was on a counterweight system. No one saw a thing. Now you're saying, how can somebody fall through the floor of a saloon and no one notice? Simple, because back in those days, the saloons were set up to get everyone smashed. That means the victims and the witnesses. And this is how it worked. At the base of the bar was a trough. This is where the patron stood. The trough was made out of tin, brass, or tile. And between the trough and the top of the bar was a series of brass oval towel racks with towels. And the idea was this: never to let that person stop drinking, never. And if nature called, that was disrupting the flow of booze into his system by having to go outside and relieve himself. So they let them relieve themselves right there in the bar in the trough. And it worked. It worked. The victims got drunk and the witnesses got drunk. So nobody saw when they fell through that floor. So if they were standing at the wrong place at the right time, that bartender would pull that lever. When they fell through the floor, they were considered harpooned. That's the term they used, harpooned. It was like a whale. Once they're harpooned, there's no escape. The Shanghaiers had them. Once they sold them to a sea captain, they were considered shipped. That's what they called them, shipped. Now this trapdoor system was known as a deadfall. Now you've probably heard of deadfalls in like being a log trap out in the woods, which would kill the prey that you're after. This was called a deadfall because once they fell through that floor, for 6 years you might as well consider the person dead because they had no control over their life for 6 years and they may not come back. These deadfalls were so efficient, Portland soared to #1 in the world for Shanghai. They used this trapdoor system also in San Francisco. They used it in Astoria, and they used it at a place that's known for its Victorian houses today, Port Townsend, Washington. But when you fell through the floor in Port Townsend, you had a boat waiting for you because you landed in the water. The underground was an incredible system. It wasn't one little piece. It wasn't the tunnel. It was the trapdoors. It was the knockout drops. It was the vice. It was the whole combination, the corruption. That made it a real underworld. This was the unheavenly side of Portland. This was the place of darkness and shadows. This was a place of silence where it creeps. This was a place that represented Portland's shame, its ultimate shame. Now, around Halloween, a storm was supposed to come in from the sea. They said it was going to be terrible rain, wind, and cold, and it never struck. It was really mild. But 120 years ago, it did strike. And Joseph Buncle Kelly, that Shanghaier, was standing on the street looking for one more victim. The brothels were empty. No one was in the saloons. Opium dens, no one. Gambling parlors, no one. The streets were deserted. Everything was vacant. And he needed one more man. So we looked across the street to Wild Man's cigar store. And there, standing outside, was a carved cigar store Indian. And he was thinking, oh my God, imagine if this was a live Native American. I could sell them. Because Native Americans were highly sought after because they worked hard, they adapted the life on the ship easy, and they never complained. And they were hot property. That's who the Shanghaiers wanted. But since this guy wasn't alive, he decided to make use of him, just the same. He threw a tarp over him, and him and his partner tied him up, and they hauled all 7 feet 2 inches of him to a ship. And they told the captain, this man isn't going to cost you $50. He's not going to cost you $55, but he's going to cost you $75 because you haven't seen anything so big and strong as this man. And he said, if you don't want him, we'll haul him to the captain next door and he'll buy him. Well, this captain said, I'll take him. So they hauled him down to the forecastle of the ship, and they warned this captain, don't you try to wake him up until you're well out to sea, because you will never be able to handle him if you do. The captain said he understood. After he had crossed the bar to the Pacific, he decided to get a good look at this man he had paid so much. So he went down to the bottom of the ship, and he grabbed a hold of him and began to shake him awake. And he realized, oh my God, he's stiff. He's dead, he thought. Rigor mortis had set in, so he unwrapped him, and he found this incredible cigar store Indian. And he realized that Bunko Kelly had pulled one over on him. So he tossed him overboard, and later on he floated up in a net near Astoria. Now, old-timers say, when this carving was shanghaied, something new came to the underground, a new shadow. Now, there were always shadows down here, and they say these were the shadows of those who had passed on while being shanghaied. But this shadow was bigger than the rest. And they say it was the shadow of the cigar store Indian looking for his body. Now, just before Halloween, we returned the cigar store Indian to the underground. And everything that would go wrong that night did. And it took hours and hours and hours to get the site ready for him. And everyone working with me claimed they saw a shadow on the corner of their eye. And everyone became nervous. We didn't haul this cigar store Indian back to the underground until almost 12 midnight. And when we got him down here finally, lights began turning off and on, doors began opening and closing, and the underground took on a whole new different feeling.
I have no idea. Give it a shot, honey. You never know.
Yeah, I know this one.
I'm stuck in here, Irene.
Get somebody over here. During the Victorian era, women were warned, do not go to dances. Because if you go to dances, you may disappear and never be seen again. But if by chance you go to a dance, like the dances held at Lazo's Saloon across the way there, never leave your date's side for any reason. Ever. But the women, they love to get some fresh air in this courtyard. And if they were left alone, they vanished forever. They were taken into the underground, held in cells, later taken through the tunnels to the waterfront, put aboard ship, and sold. Sold to white slavers, and they ended up in places like San Francisco and New York. Women were warned, do not go to restaurants. Because if you go to a restaurant, you may vanish. Stay home. Eat at a relative's house, but don't go out. It's too dangerous. This is the Victorian era. One place that was very notorious was at 3rd and Start, where Cameron's bookstore is today. And at Cameron's bookstore, above it is a restaurant called the Golden Dragon. Before it was the Golden Dragon, it was an interesting place. They had booths there, but the booths had little rooms around it. So you could have a lot of privacy. And the walls just went barely around the booth. And if you were a gentleman and you were escorting a lady who was of the right age, sometime during dinner there would be a knock at the door from the waiter to discuss the bill. Now the gentleman escort, being a man of intelligence, realizing how dangerous the city was, he would exit the room and put his back against the door so nothing could go in and nothing could get out. After they were through discussing the bill, he would re-enter the room only to find the woman gone. The booth would have opened up, she would have fallen backwards down a slide into the underground, where she was grabbed, held, and later taken through the underground to the water, put aboard ship, and ended up in places beyond. Now, in every group, there's information, and I had this one lady a couple years ago, and after talking about the white slavery, had a look on her face. And I just turned to her and I said, "You've got a story, and why don't you share it with us?" And she did. Her aunt lived in St. John's. She'd never met her aunt before. This is during the 20s. And she worked at night. And she was either got off a bus or a streetcar line or something like that, and she had to walk 2 blocks to her house. One night she never made it. Never made it. 3 years later, a letter came to this lady's mother, who was this lady's sister. And she was in San Francisco, and she said, "Come quick, I am very sick, and I have this story to tell you." So she rushed to her side, and she told her this story. That while walking home that one night, she was grabbed right off the street, taken into this old building down into the underground, where she was held in a cell with some other women for 3 days. This was in St. John's. They brought her through a tunnel to the waterfront, put her aboard a ship. They ended up in San Francisco, where she was put into white slavery. And there she was forced to work until she became too sick, and then they threw her out in the street. And some lady picked her up and brought her home and tried to help her. And this girl's mother reached her bedside just in time, because 3 days later she died. There was nothing pleasant about Portland's underground. It was not a romantic story. It was a story of horrible, horrible atrocities. It was human abuse at its worst. And maybe, just maybe, if these things that people are seeing, the shadows, the doors opening and closing, maybe, just maybe, those are spirits reminding us of this past, the past that some people still to this very day do not want told. I thank you very much.
Well, that was a very educational piece of footage there. A lot of stuff we learned on that tour. And also we'd taken a lot of photographs down there. And I have several that we'll show you in just a moment. And that was just from one tour. Now, Bob, you've taken a lot of photographs down there, and I think you always go down with your camera, right?
I've only been down there one time without my camera.
Yeah?
And that one time was it. But every time I go down there, regardless if it's for a work group or if it's to help out with a tour, I've always got my camera with me.
And I think you were telling me before that other than the one time, you never go down there empty-handed, and I think you never come out empty-handed either.
I never came out of there without something on film.
Yeah.
I mean, like
there's so much going on down there that it's hard not to get a picture of something.
Well, see, last time I was down there, I took a roll and a half and I got one roll out of a roll and a half of film that was nothing but orbs.
Wow. How long does a tour typically last, or is there an average?
It depends on the kind of tour you want. If you want the historical tour, it's usually an hour, 15, hour and a half.
Okay.
If you want the ghost tour, then it's an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh, really?
If you want the combination tour, you're looking at a 2-hour tour.
2 hour, yeah. So maybe the best one would be to get the combination. That way you get a chance to take photographs and also hear the historical aspects of the tunnels,
Right.
how they operated, when they operated.
And if you don't have too many people, then the tour kind of moves on a little bit quicker.
Right.
But you still have time to take your photos and everything while Michael's talking. And before we move to another room, you can take photos anytime you want down there. You can take your tape recorder down there and do a tape recording of what's going on down there. We've had people that's picked up EVPs on tape recorders. We had one lady that's kind of in the group, but she's a real good friend. Her name is River. She has an EVP of a lady saying Cantoon,
Yeah.
which means voice of enchantment. That means she approved of the stories that Michael was telling about the Shanghai Tunnels.
Yeah. They seem to like him down there.
They love him down there. And they were so happy when we got back into the tunnels because the tunnels were shut down for a while.
Right.
Due to security problems. So now the tunnels are open and now they're happy that we're doing the tours again. There's not things being thrown around down there when there was no tour. When there was tours weren't going on, things were being thrown around.
Yeah.
The businesses upstairs, they were having things happening that was unexplained, but as soon as the tours started up, then everything upstairs mellowed out. And like I said, they were happy we were back.
Yeah. So it's a good thing all around.
Yes, it is.
Definitely worth checking out. I think at the end of the show here, we'll give you some information on how you can get in on these tours, as far as the cost, location, anything we can give you. We'll get to that a little bit later. Right now, I think what we'll do is we'll share with you some of the many photographs that we've gotten down in the Shanghai Tunnels. Okay, that is going to do it for this second edition of Nowhere Videos Visions from Beyond. We want to thank several people here. Actually, we want to thank all the folks out here at Neer City Cemetery for allowing us to videotape our show here this evening. We want to thank the Fowlers and the Archibalds here who were sharing their stone with us for our wonderful background that we have here.
And we also want to thank the people that are standing here behind us.
Yes.
Through most of this video, because I've felt the presence of them here, and I've got a headache from one of them. And last night I came up here and I got the same thing. I got a headache from them.
Yeah.
So there's one person here that's very strong, very negative.
Well, we're almost done. We're almost done, so don't have to worry about that. But it's actually interesting that you mentioned that. It was as we have you folks out there watching our show. We also have an audience here watching us as we tape this. And when Kevin and I videotaped our first show out at Redmond Memorial Cemetery, we had an audience then too. In fact, we'd taken Kevin had snapped a few pictures while I was setting up for the show, and they definitely wanted to know what the heck we were doing out there.
See, curiosity gets to them.
Oh yes.
But for us, it's kind of what we do with the paranormal is try to help figure out what's going on and try to help people understand what's going on beyond our world.
There's definitely something beyond there. Just as the title, we share with you our visions from beyond. That's why we're here. Continuing our list of thank yous, we want to thank Michael P. Jones of Cascade Geographic Society for allowing us to videotape our tour down in the Portland Shanghai Tunnels, at least one section of the tunnels. That was a great tour, and we thank Michael for letting us do that. Also want to thank the other members of Northwest Paranormal Investigations for sharing their fantastic photographs with us. And we want to thank everyone out there for watching our show tonight. And there will be more as soon as we gather enough to make another show.
And we're pretty close to it right now.
Pretty close. We're within a month of taking our next big excursion back to Virginia City, Nevada, where the place is just crawling with activity. Again, it's hard not to get anything there because there's so much going on.
And if you get into our website, you go to the Shanghai Tunnels and you'll come to one of the photos. Just click on the photos and that'll take you right to the Shanghai Tunnels website.
The website for Northwest Paranormal, great site to check out. Doesn't cost anything. You can see a bunch of these great photographs taken by the club, and also get information on upcoming events and learning about paranormal. The address for that is www.northwestparanormal.freehomepage.com. A great website to check out. Very fascinating. If you're online, check it out. I think that's going to do it for us tonight here at Neer City Cemetery, as we're sitting here freezing under a full moon.
At least the way ain't as cold tonight as it was last night.
No, but
it's getting there.
It's getting there. So with that, we're going to call it a show. We want to thank you for watching. I'm Todd Hilton.
I'm Bob Chamberlain.
And until next time, keep an open mind and keep the cameras clicking. We'll see you later.